Hey, what's up guys? So today we're going to be talking about The Amazing Spider-Man number 22. Spoiler warning ahead, I will be outright talking about the comic book itself, so if you haven't read the story and you want to know what happens before you hear me talk about it, then probably do so right now. Otherwise, if you just want to follow along the story through my video, then you're also welcome to do so. But without further ado, let's begin. We begin the story in a right now event. Mr. Osborn is watching a news report over the events that are happening. The news reporter says, "If you look behind me, you may catch a glimpse of the unidentified super being believed to be causing the weather event. Though with costume heroics outlawed, it may fall to the city to mount a response." And as Osborn is watching this, he says, "Peter was right." And his assistant behind him questions, "Mr. Osborn?" Osborn continues talking. "He found his way back. Find Mary Jane's family. They'll need protection. And ready the suit. I'm going out." He starts walking in the direction to get his suit. His assistant follows behind him and questions, "Every time you suit up, there's legal exposure. Are you sure this is smart?" Osborn is determined and continues walking and says, "Smart and right aren't always the same thing. I want the support team briefed and ready to launch in 5 minutes." He walks into the room where his suit is contained, and he's surprised and questions, "The hell?" And it's revealed Kamala Khan's just like standing right in front of it, and she turns over to look at him super surprised. And Osborn questions, "Can I help you, Miss Khan?" And she responds with, "Mr. Osborn, I'm sorry, Osborn cuts her off and says, "In an authorized area," but she feels the need to explain and says, That's true, but the suit, it just looks very engineered and cool. I had to take a look. Don't fire me." Osborn is really stern about this and says, "I should, but my hypocrisy does have limits. I know a thing or two about irresponsible curiosity, but it's time for you to go. Now." As she's walking out of the room, she asks Osborn one more question. "Of course, I assume you'll be checking on the weather event?" But Osborn is sort of in a rush and just says, "Goodbye, Miss Khan," making a point that he really just wants her to leave. She continues walking out and says, "Right, I'm leaving. You don't have to worry about me." Osborn has kind of a confused look on his face, as she looks like she has something up her sleeve here. We cut to the events of a year ago, following the moment where Peter and MJ get teleported into this destroyed world during Spider-Man's fight with Rabin, and it looks like they're both running away from something. We're inside of Peter's thoughts right now, and he's thinking, "For days we've been on the move trying to get our bearings, scrounging for food. Much of anything, really. That creepy Dr. Rabin returned, calling himself the emissary, and sent us here. But MJ isn't asking about that." And what is she asking about? Remember how they're being chased by something? Well, this is the point where MJ's asking, "What is it?" And Peter responds with, "I don't know." We cut back to Peter's thoughts, and he's thinking, "She's asking about this." And they're running away from, the best that I can describe is probably a cyborg dinosaur? Peter's yelling at MJ to keep moving, but the dinosaur starts catching up to Peter, and it sorta tries talking, but its speech bubble is some weird symbol. Spider-Man feels the need to punch it in the jaw to try to have it back off. And he's thinking, "You'll land a solid punch to its jaw, and its jaw is anything but." Looks like it was able to mold its jaw in a form so that his punch was basically useless. It was like jelly almost. The cyborg dinosaur reaches out and punches him in the gut, and he's thinking, but its fist is pretty sturdy, if you were wondering. This knocks Peter almost immobile. He's on the ground. Whatever this dinosaur has in store for Peter, he's gonna do whatever he wants. MJ's running away, and she turns back and sees this and yells his name. But Spider-Man tries getting up here. Of course, he wants to continue the fight, but he persists to MJ to keep running. She does continue running, but she's looking back at Spider-Man at the same time, just trying to communicate. And she's not looking where she's going. And a mysterious figure walks out of nowhere, and she bumps into him. She's wondering what? But the mysterious man tells her to move aside, and he pulls out this futuristic looking weapon. Or I shouldn't say futuristic, because all these comic weapons always end up looking futuristic or weird in design. I should say he just pulls out a weapon that looks like it would be something from his universe. Pulls it out and just obliterates this cyborg T-Rex. Spider-Man is finally able to get up on his feet and says, "Holy." And the mysterious man starts talking and says, "These things aren't so scary. You just have to disrupt their symbology." Spider-Man, of course, is confused by this and says, "Okay, sure. You live here? Where are we? The mysterious figure responds to his question and says, right where the emissary wants you. He takes off his hood to reveal he's none other than fucking Paul. So here is where we properly introduce Paul into the story for the first time. It starts getting dark out, and Paul leads them to his secret base. He starts telling them some symbols take different meanings under a full moon. That's to say we need to get inside, but it's also to say no one knows what these symbols mean at any particular time of day. Looks like they get up to a door and Paul starts messing around with like this symbol looking passcode thing that unlocks the door, of course. They walk into his hideout and Paul says, "This is my home. Don't touch anything." MJ questions, "Will we be safe here?" Paul turns back to look at her and responds with, "I didn't say that." Looks like they walk into an area of his hideout that's more well lit and they start seeing what the inside looks like. And Peter goes, "Oh wow, totems." Paul responds to Peter saying totems with, "They're symbols of all types." Peter apologizes and says, "Sure, sorry, I'm kind of a totem guy." Paul says, "I see that." Peter's wondering about the universe here and questions, "The tech here, it's based on them?" But Paul says, "The technology is them." Peter starts telling them about how they got there and says, "The man who sent us here, he had them all over his body, Dr. Rabin." And Paul kind of corrects him here and says, "That's not his name, not anymore." We start getting curious here and Peter asks him, "You know him?" And Paul says, "I worked with him, part of a team he led, unlocking the powers of a new quantum symbology." Paul starts elaborating a little bit more here and says, "Reality, all matter is information. Math, physics, quantum mechanics, all attempts to symbolize the information so it can be manipulated. We wondered if we could compress the information into a higher form of symbology. He was the best at it. His mathematics began to resemble the glyphics of ancient cultures. We wondered if they had wielded this power before us." MJ questions here, had they? And he continues, "Maybe for a time, but they were smart enough to forbid it. We were not. The technology was beautiful, intoxicating. Imbued with the right symbology, a piece of tech could create matter or achieve perpetual motion. We'd found the cheat code to reality, but only the emissary realized what we were really doing, communing with higher beings." Peter states, "Gods." Paul claims he doesn't believe in gods, but Peter has encountered different and says, "The one I met didn't care," referring to, I guess, a previous encounter with a god. It doesn't elaborate more than that. As Peter's looking around the room, he notices something and he says, "Wait, what is this?" Paul says, "Oh, kind of a long story. Spider's symbology seemed suited to traveling to different realities along quantum strings." Peter says, "Strands," but Paul continues, "Either way, I couldn't get it to work." And Peter questions, "Mind if I take a look?" And this is the moment it's revealed that this device he's talking about is the very device that he's holding in like the very first page of issue 1 of this comic run. So now we know where that device came from, but we don't know what it does yet. So we'll see here. And then we cut over to Rabin, who's now within the same destroyed city universe, but he's in just a different section. He starts chanting and he creates a symbol on the ground. From that symbol, a bowl filled with water appears, and he uses it to splash his face with it. Like, this dude is playing with literal cheat codes. As he's washing his face, a voice from behind him says, "Why do you wash your face?" And he says, "I didn't have a chance to shave." This is where we get revealed who this voice is that's behind him, that's talking to him. And it's the character from the cover, just so you have an idea of who it is. And the god character talking to Rabin says, "You seek communion? You will always be unclean, blasphemous priest. My ceremony was desecrated by your failure. You wanted my holy power, but you will die without even seeing my face." Rabin responds with, "Wrong, Wayep. I've come to prepare our bond. I've come with a sacrifice, and the sun blood." Now we know who this Wayep character that he was referring to from the previous issue is. We cut back to Spider-Man, MJ, and Paul in Paul's hangout. Spider-Man Spider-Man's continuing tinkering with that device that I mentioned, and Peter starts saying, "You sure you've never heard of the web of life and destiny? This is almost trying to be a dimensional travel watch. My multiversal counterparts use them to travel between dimensions. It needs to be calibrated to phase grab the quantum strands that allow for travel, but it could work. Send one of us home. You still have the Fantastic Four's number, MJ?" MJ responds with, "Yeah, I can't stop Johnny from giving me his." Peter questions, "What?" MJ quickly says, "Nothing." Paul continues the conversation and says, "Did you say multiversal counterparts?" And this is where MJ just makes it a little less confusing by saying, "Let's not get into the weeds here. There's a lot about this situation that doesn't make sense. Like what you're doing here." Referring to Paul. And Paul says, "It wasn't my choice. I was his guinea pig, a long time ago. To me, at least. He sent me here to deliver a message to Wayep. A message he'd carve in... He doesn't want to finish his sentence and just says, "Rabin is a sadistic man. Take my word for it." MJ assures him, "I don't have to." And she continues, "When he marked me, I saw what he wanted to do. Death. The world in ruins. It looked like this place." Paul continues talking, "Because this world had its own emissary, who called the same entity Rabin's courting, the creature that choked the life out of this place. And now this deity wants for access to another world, another conquest. Rabin had done it too, but Spider-Man stopped the ceremony and became a symbol of their defeat. A symbol with power. That's why you can't be here. To finish the ceremony, they must first kill Spider-Man." Spider-Man finishes tinkering with the goober and says, Guys, I did it." Shows it to them and says, "I can get us out of here." In this instant, the god barges in and breaks down the wall and yells, "Sunblood." Everyone tries getting to safety and Spider-Man says, "No, not him." Paul and MJ are trying to get away. MJ's yelling at Peter and says, "Run, Peter." But Paul seems like he knows what's going on with the situation here and says, "You can't run from that." Spider-Man tries shoving some debris in this god's path to try to slow him down and yells at Paul and MJ and says, "I'll buy you some time. Go." But then this god that's after Spider-Man says, "You robbed me of my sacrifice, Sunblood, but you're only a painting in a cave. I am a god of scab and bone." He opens up a portal here, and it looks like he shoves his weapon through it. He also opens up another portal right next to him, and his arm goes through that one. And he continues saying, "I will break time to kill you." Spider-Man's still trying to create some safe distance for MJ and Paul to get away, and says, "You guys go, I'll hold him off." Sure, they're at a great distance, but Paul turns back and says, "He already beat you." MJ hears this and looks behind her and questions, "What?" And at this moment, Spider-Man gets a brutal beatdown. The same portals that the god opened up earlier are now opening around Spider-Man, and we're hearing the same phrase that was said earlier by the god, saying, "But you're only a painting in a cave. I am a god of scab and bone." This is where that first portal opens up and his weapon attacks Spider-Man in the face. Then another one opens up behind him and the god continues saying, "I will break time to kill you." And this is where his arm goes through and grabs him by the head. And the god finishes by saying, "Your life binds me, Sunblood, and your death will open your world to me." But these blue tentacles start reaching for Spider-Man. They grab him, causing this god to let him go, and Spider-Man is successfully able to get freed, causing the god hand to go back into the portal. What are these tentacles? Paul had a weapon, and Spider-Man starts questioning Paul. "What are you doing?" Paul says, "Octopus gun. It confuses your symbology. Bought us a little time. Use the spider device. Get out of here." Spider-Man is insisting on saving MJ and says, "No, we're sending MJ." But Paul is also very determined here and says, "If you die, there's nothing holding them back. The emissary will murder our world." Like I said, Spider-Man is very determined and says, "I'm not leaving her. Do you hear me?" Grabs Paul by the shirt. But MJ intervenes and says, "Stop it. We don't have much time." And this is when Spider-Man pulls out the little goober and hands it to MJ and says, "It's honed in to New York, or close enough. It's the big green button. Go. Now." Paul grabs MJ and says, "Shit, move." and then another portal opens up where the god is trying to reach for Spider-Man once more. The god certainly does grab a hold of Spider-Man, freaking him out, and he starts threatening him. Come pave the black road with your entrails. He sends his fist through the portal again and punches Spider-Man in the face, and continues his monologue and says, "Die for me, Spider, as I turn your totems to dust." And it looks like the god specifically reaches for Spider-Man's costume and tears off the spider from his chest. And this gets Spider-Man sort of curious and says, "What are you?" But now instead of facing Spider-Man through the portals, the god breaks down the debris and encounters Spider-Man face to face. Now he's screwed. The god says, "I am the god of mischief and death, scar and marrow," punches Spider-Man in the face, sending him flying. The god grabs him by the throat, tears off his mask, and says, "I am the blackness of night, the white rage of your sun, and I am here to take everything you are." MJ just can't sit down and watch this happen, right? So she storms in there, yells at the god, "Enough!" As Spider-Man's being held up, Spider-Man's questioning, "MJ, what are you doing?" But MJ here says, "Sorry, Tiger, he can't have you." Spider-Man quickly realizes what's happening here, and MJ tosses that goober into Spider-Man's costume, while simultaneously pressing the button. Spider-Man yells no, and this is where a portal opens up, sending Spider-Man through it, but at this point, the god is still pretty determined to take out Spider-Man. And he starts talking to MJ and says, "Wait your turn, Scarlet Woman. First I squish the spider, and then I feast on your..." Through the portal, that god himself gets cut in half. Peter safely makes it through it, of course, while also taking one half with him. MJ's now safe with Paul and questions, "Did I..." Paul finishes the sentence by saying, "Cut a god in half? Yes, you did." And he knows a little bit here. He says, "And gods don't die gentle," referring how this dude is about to go nuclear. He yells at MJ to get down, while also running up to this god and pushing him through the rest of that portal. And then on the other side of that portal, it's just outside York, Pennsylvania, where we start getting some resemblance of the location of the first page, again, in the first issue. So the portal opens up in the sky. The first thing that goes through it looks like it's the first half of that god. He lands on the ground and explodes. Now that's what I'm assuming caused the crater in the first issue to create that hook for us. And then the second thing that comes out of that portal is Spider-Man himself yelling no. But here's where we get a third thing that goes through the portal. And that third thing was the second half of that god that Paul pushed through the portal. As Spider-Man is falling, he starts webbing a lot behind him as he's falling head first. There is a bright light, so I don't really understand what he's trying to do, but he's going like, "Come on, come on," and that's basically where the story ends. That's the cliffhanger. So what did I think about the comic book? Well, I thought it was a pretty solid Spider-Man comic. I definitely had my fun with it. Finally, so many questions are getting answered in these issues. I like how the comic starts. It's definitely setting up a big conflict with our heroes against this Dr. Rabin. Now, this is like a conflict I'm looking forward to. So honestly, I really hope it's not a disappointment. I did like, though, how they finally brought up the whole making the superheroes outlawed thing. That rarely has gotten brought up in this Spider-Man comic. So I thought the start of the story was pretty good. But then we did cut to the events of like a year ago when Spider-Man and MJ are getting chased by this dinosaur thing. And this is when I was like, oh man, that goofy fucking shit from like Dark Web is happening right now. This is where my interest in the story sort of went down quickly, and I was like, damn bro, what the heck? What are we in for? But then when Paul showed up and is being shown off as like this badass guy from this universe who has dealt with some crazy shit, then my interest sort of peaked again. If you can start making Paul feel more like a badass instead of just a character that we really don't know anything about, besides him just having kids and being with MJ, then I'm down with that. I also really liked how Peter in this issue was very analytical. Of course, how he should be. So when he starts talking to Paul about how the world here works and all the symbols and everything that Paul has had to deal with, that's great. Peter's actually being smart and getting more awareness over the situation and what he's dealing with. Now, where the fuck were those wits in the previous issue before he saw this like literal real life cheat code dude break into MJ's apartment, and he just decided to just storm up to him before even like getting any sort of awareness to the situation. What the hell? But it's good to see those wits being applied here, you know. And then another thing I liked was the God himself, who was after Spider-Man. I really liked how he only had one goal, and that's to take out Spider-Man. He was so devoted to that goal that I liked what happened here, but it kind of doesn't make sense. But he was so devoted to that goal that he opened up some portals at his convenience and just attacked Spider-Man through time and space. I thought that was pretty badass. Like, I really did enjoy the villain that was after Spider-Man in this one. The God of Bone and Marrow. Man, he was pretty badass. When I saw the cover of this issue, I thought he looked like the most badass, what I assumed to be a villain, of course. And I really did not want that really cool looking design of a character to go to waste on a villain that simply just wasn't cool, of course. But no, I really liked the God. He was a pretty cool threat. Like I said, it's a pretty solid Spider-Man comic for sure, but there were a few things that I was questioning. Like, bro, didn't Spider-Man say that this portal was only gonna be able to like send one person back? And it was open for like a good amount of time, to the point where we were able to open up the portal, send Spider-Man through it, send one half of this God through it, have Paul intervene and push the God through the portal, basically being able to send like 3 dudes through the portal, right? But then again, we also don't know what happens, because literally the story cuts off right after these 3 entities go through the portal. So I can't really start bashing on this. Oh, and one more thing that I enjoyed was the build up to Rabin himself. Like, he's built up to be this very menacing threat that is able to just create any sort of matter, any sort of thing into being. He's almost like a god at that point. But of course, he was using the powers from the other god, the other real god, to do so. So who knows what's gonna happen now that he's split in half? That's another question that's built up here in this issue. But again, I liked what we're doing with Rabin. I hope that conflict with all the heroes and Rabin ends up being pretty cool. Like I said, pretty solid issue. I like where this is going. It has me hooked, but I'm definitely cautious over what's happening, because Dark Web definitely left a bad taste in my mouth, so I'm kind of wary over some goofy ass shit that we try to pull in here. But anyways, I appreciate you guys for listening to me talk about this comic book. And if you're interested in listening to me talk about the upcoming issues, then make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.